We now move on to the real affirmative action. Jim Crow policies were openly white supremacist in nature, but so was the New Deal. Ira Katznelson, in his book, When Affirmative Action Was White, describes FDR's New Deal domestic policies as openly tied to white skin privilege. From the 1930s and 40s, US policy transferred $100 billion to wealthier white Americans while intentionally neglecting far more impoverished BIPOC individuals, specifically Blacks. The New Deal started in March 1933 as the US was crippled by the Great Depression when President Roosevelt was elected with a mandate to provide, quote, reform and recovery, unquote. Southern Democrats, the key to congressional passage, refused votes for every one of these laws until they specifically excluded Black people. Let's look at some examples. Social Security. At that time, 75% of American Blacks still lived in the South, with the majority working in just two occupations, agricultural labor, such as sharecropping, and domestic labor. Southern Democrats refused to vote for 1935 Social Security Act until it specifically excluded both agricultural workers and domestic workers. As reflected by the Aunt Jemima stereotype, between 85 to 95% of all Southern domestic workers were Black women. All were blocked from Social Security. When Congress agreed to labor laws establishing minimum wage, a 5-day work week, and collective bargaining, Southern white Democrats also insisted on anti-Black exclusions with such statements as, quote, you cannot prescribe the same wages for the Black man as for the white man, unquote. No minimum wage for Blacks became federal policy. The impacts of housing laws are literally set in stone. Segregation is directly tied to both higher incarceration rates and lower educational attainment. The New Deal's National Housing Act, or NHA, which instituted the 30-year mortgage and low fixed interests, created an underwriter's manual, which enshrined the private sector tradition of racially restrictive covenants. It opposed grouping quote unquote inharmonious racial groups or incompatible racial elements. This manual specified 4 tiers, from green neighborhoods that were new, homogenous, and had non-ethnic white business and professional men, to red neighborhoods defined as hazardous and not appropriate for receiving mortgages. All neighborhoods with inharmonious or incompatible racial groups were automatically categorized as hazardous. In Seattle, Asian, Black, and Native Americans in the Central District were thus not eligible for federal loans to buy or improve their homes. Your education, your access to jobs, your wealth, and your health are all connected to where you live. All of this is why there is a 20-year difference in life expectancy between different areas of Puget Sound. Because home ownership is the top contributor to household wealth, FHA policies obstructed wealth accumulation for untold numbers of hardworking non-white families. From 1934 to 1962, the FHA spent $120 billion to help 11 million families buy a home and 22 million families improve their homes. Almost unbelievably, 98% of this money went to white families. The descendants of these white families still continue to benefit today. America is racist. We've introduced how the structures we take for granted were grounded in racist ideas, impacting student communities of color and our students in ways that still continue. The Chicano community was established 500 years ago in a multiracial society that was anathema to Anglo-Americans and has been treated with disdain for 200 years. The United States' vaunted economy was predicated on Indian removal and the torture of slaves to grow cotton. White supremacy resurged immediately after federal troops left the South, nullifying the effects of 3 constitutional amendments and establishing an era of terror. The explicit intent of US policy towards Native Americans was cultural genocide. Though it did not completely succeed, it inflicted lasting damage. Chicano communities working as migrants rose up through community organizing to establish basic civil rights, but still remain outside of the norms of American society. Colonization of the Pacific Islands has resulted in a loss of home and health. While the United States gained critical access for their military and trade routes, which sustained the economy, Pacific Islanders were left with broken promises of healthcare and education. Federal policies created the US middle class. Their net impact was incalculable social, financial, and health affirmative action for whites. Thank you for your time listening to these recordings, and have a nice day.